then we can go ahead and begin the lecture. Thank you guys so much for all coming out. I'm Claire Posniak from Riichi Nomi New York City. Periodically, our club puts on lectures hosted mostly by guests to the club, although occasionally a very talented local will put one on as well. Today, we are very excited to present to you a lecture by two experts on the Mahjong AI tools that are available to learn more about the game, learn more about the AI tools that exist. Today, we have the pleasure of presenting to you Navitas and redpandamaster, who both are from the infamous Snake Shack, if you guys are aware of it, where you can study the AIs. They also both are well-renowned in their own rights. I posted in Mahjong Advice just now. You can see Navitas has a Twitch that you can follow if you want to watch someone playing better than you at Mahjong. And redpandamaster has got a blog where you can also read if you're interested in things like statistics, learning from AI, articles about that, if you're more of the kind of learner who prefers things in text. Without further ado, we can go ahead and begin. My only note is that we are going to be doing questions, such as there's going to be what would you do problems, audience participation, very encouraged in those. Just going to ask that everyone go on mute in the chat, and then if you want to ask questions or participate in the what would you do, you use our Mahjong Advice channel, which I just pinged a bunch of people in. If you didn't see it, I pinged the opinion game, the Nomi, so that's where you can put any comments that you've got, either questions for the presenters or answers to the what would you do problem. So with that being said, thank you very much again, and take it away, redpandamaster and Navitas.
Thanks for the introduction. To start off, we want to first start off with, I guess, the table of contents of what we're going to be talking about. So this talk is going to be, the first half is going to be Navitas presenting about Naga. And there's a lot to talk about with the Naga AI, which is a great general purpose AI. Naga is a paid service, so if you don't want to pay, Mortal is a great free alternative. And then for the last half, I'm going to be talking about some other Mahjong AI that you may not have heard of, and when you might want to use those to supplement or instead of Naga.
Yeah, just one thing I will add, if after this lecture anyone is interested in trying out Naga, now it's actually a great time because due to some issues with their host website at the moment, their payment service is actually down. So anyone can try out Naga for free at the moment. So it's a great time to try it out.
So I'll start off with talking about what we mean by Mahjong AI and what we might call them Mahjong AI. So the first example would be a Mahjong playing AI. So these are AI that could play a Mahjong game. So for example, Naga, Mortal, Lucky J, Suffix, and Ako-chan. These are all AI that you could play against or that could play on ladder. And they make a decision for a given Mahjong position. We also have simulators. So for example, Nisi, Ako-chan, Pystyle, Kobalab, or the Naga simulator. And these basically simulate Mahjong gameplay, and they might estimate values like expected value, win rate, or deal rate. And they might, they all work slightly differently, and we will talk about that later. Another type of AI would be Nisi statistics. These are basically all taken from the Nisi simulator, and they are based on Ho data. And if you read a Mahjong statistics book, you will see some of these stats. And then the last one I have is placement estimators. So a placement estimator basically you put in, for the start of your round, your score and your opponent's scores, and it estimates if you're going to get first, second, third, or fourth at the end of a round. And there are a few of these: Naga estimator, the Mortal estimator. There's one called Benawii, which we will look at. There's not just Mahjong playing AI. There are other AI that you can use to analyze positions. With that, we're going to start off the first half with Navitas talking about Naga.
Yeah, so before we get going here, just I wanted to use this first slide just to sort of say my argument for why I think pretty much anybody who's looking to try to improve at Mahjong, once you learn the very basics and get past like, the rules of the game and efficiency, learning past that, I think AI is just an incredibly useful tool. You can certainly supplement it with other forms of, review and like books, and there's definitely still a place for having reviews of a human. But I think AI is just an incredibly useful tool that if you haven't already tried out using, it's definitely I think worth trying out. And so I just have a sort of couple points. The first is like convenience. You can just, anytime you finish a game, you can just throw it into either like Naga or Mortal for free. And if you want to get like a human review, it takes a lot of time. Also, like there's only like, depending on who you're working with, there's probably a limit to how many reviews you could get. You wouldn't want to ask for someone to review like 3 logs a day, but AI will always be there to review your log. And so the second point I sort of have here is just the level of play. It's whatever AI you use, either Naga or Mortal, they're both very strong players. And particularly if you understand what they're good at, you can use them as a tool to learn those skills that they're really good at. Like all AI, I think, are very good at efficiency. And efficiency is incredibly important in Mahjong. So while trying to learn efficiency, I think using an AI is a great way. It'll look at your hand. You can see what mistakes are making efficiency mistakes, and they'll point them out. So it's a great way for learning that. And then also sort of like, defensive play and like, push full judgment, all that things. It's just, there's, it's a very, what AI's strong points, they're very good at those strong points. It has a few weaknesses, which we'll get into later, which is why I think it's the best use of AI is to, as a complement to other forms of study as well. But what AI is good at, it's very good at. Consistency is another thing. While you're trying to learn, it can be a bit frustrating if you're getting, if you're for a given situation, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a whole bunch of different answers, which it can be good because you get different like arguments for each side, but it can be tricky to figure out like what I'm actually supposed to be doing in this position. But if you ask Mortal or Naga, it's going to consistently give you the same advice. So you can sort of see like, oh, in this position, the AI is always going to do this, which can, I think, help sort of make your own play a bit more consistent. And then finally, just a smaller time commitment. I know, like particularly when I'm happy to do some log reviews, but they're very time lengthy process for both the person giving the review and the person reading the review. It usually, for me, it can take up to like an hour to review a game. Sometimes it can take even longer. Some people do it a bit quicker, but it takes a long time to do a full log review. But in AI, maybe you only have like 15 minutes to review. You can easily, I think, review a game, especially if you're just like looking for a few key points of the game. You can just sort of skim through it, and it doesn't take as long as reviewing with another player. So that's sort of my argument for why you should be using AI. Here, just real quickly, is the Naga screen for those who haven't seen it. This is the sort of translated screen. It's of a slightly older version of Naga, so it's the layout's a little bit differently. This is taken from the Pataho blog, which the link's there on the screen. But yeah, this is what you're going to see when you open up Naga. And there's quite a lot of information here, but I kind of want to draw the attention to the parts that are like really, really important for doing the review. Up in the top right, there's a sort of 8 different buttons, but they all do versions of the same thing, which is just how you advance forward and backward through the log. There's some settings underneath below that. I'm not going to go too much into that, but that's how you sort of like change which player you're viewing it. Whenever you review a log with Naga, it's going to review every decision made from each player's perspective. So if you're ever wondering like, oh, that discard from my Toyman looked, a bit like, oh, what would I discard there? You can just flip it and, review their hand from their side. Which I believe is different from Mortal. I think Mortal only will review from one player's perspective. Then there's like this more settings about like how many mistakes to show on the sort of bar, which I'll get to on the bottom. But yeah, you can play around with the settings. On the screen itself, there's a few things to note. The first is that the discards are displayed a little differently than you might be used to from an online client, in that the tiles that are called still appear in their discards, and that's useful so you know like when the tile was discarded. So if you see like the Shimocha here has called like the Chun and the Hatsu, and you can see exactly when Toyman and Kamicha discarded those tiles because they're still in the discard pool. But you just do have to sort of know that, because it can be confusing. You can sort of accidentally end up, seeing like 5 different Chun tiles and be a bit confused. Next to each player, you can see like a Tenpai chance, which is just a very rough estimate on how likely Naga thinks that player is to be Tenpai. I'll talk more about that later, but I don't think it's worth paying too much attention to. The really important stuff is going to be on your hand here. And when I'm using Naga, like basically all I really care about is this purple bar. And the purple bar is how Naga's like sort of decision of what you should discard. And so above each of its sort of candidate discards, there'll be a purple bar. And the larger the purple bar, the more Naga wants to discard that. So for this example here, you can see that above the 4-so, there's a very large purple bar. So Naga is very confident that 4-so is the best discard from this spot. But there is also a smaller bar over the 1-pin and the 3-so. So Naga's sort of saying, I really think we should discard 4-so, but maybe 1-pin and 3-so there's at least some consideration to that. Whereas like if you look at something like 7-so, it's like you should never be discarding that. Below each of the tiles, there's 3 different color bars that represents each of the 3 players at the table. So you can see like blue is Kamicha, yellow is Toyman, and then green is Shimocha. And the larger that bar is, the more likely that tile is to deal into that player. So for an example, the 6-pin has a rather large bar, a rather large green bar. So there's a little bit of worry that maybe the 6-pin tile might deal into Shimocha. And then finally, below the hand, there's some more sort of graphs and numbers. The main graph is, it's, I believe, the winning chance for each player. So you can see like the yellow player, actually I'm not sure what these bars are. To be honest, I never really look at the graph here. I think it has something to do with winning chance. Do you know, Panda?
Yeah, it's on the right of the graph. It's the Ryukoku rate, upper player win rate, Dealin rate, and win rate. And our win rate, yeah.
Oh, okay. And those are I see. So that's just the chance of each of those happening, and then it changes like throughout time. So it like graphs each of those throughout the progress of the hand. I don't think those stats are particularly important. I'm also, for one, I don't think they're that accurate, but also, yeah, what I'm really interested in is just the actual discard choice rather than sort of a lot of stats, which are dubious of amount of accuracy. But what is useful about that bar is all the white lines. Well, there's a couple different color lines. On this example, they're just white lines. And those are all the points where your choice differed from Naga. So it can be useful to sort of scroll through and pull out the choices that you differed. There'll also be like a blue line if you discard for call, and a red line if you discard for Riichi decision. But that bar on the bottom can sort of just be useful for scrolling through the different choices. And then, on the right, those are the numbers that Panda was talking about. So the chance the hand goes to exhaustive draw, chance someone else wins, the deal-in rate, and the win rate. I don't pay any attention to these. I don't think you need to. It doesn't really help that much. And then finally, there's an average placement, and that's for the total game. So kind of just a rough estimate of what your placement's going to be. All these sort of statistics, they're all not very accurate, I don't think, other than the purple bar. The purple bar is the thing that's really accurate. Even like the Dealin bars underneath the tiles, they're estimated with, we don't know the exact process of how they come up with those Dealin bars, but it's some sort of like weaker estimation. So if you ever are in a situation where it's like, wow, why does Naga want to push this tile with this giant Dealin rate? It might be because Naga doesn't actually think that tile's that dangerous, and it's just the Dealin bar lying to you, which is why I don't think the Dealin bar is really that important. It's just the purple bar is the thing to pay attention to. Okay, so how can we actually use Naga to, how can we get the most out of Naga to improve our play? And it starts with playing the game itself. I really think it depends on what your goal is when you're playing, but if you're playing with the goal of trying to improve, I think you really should be fully focused on the game. And for every small little decision, like consider like even the small differences. Like maybe you just have like a 1 so and a 1 pin, and it's like, you could just pick one at random, but I think it is worth considering even like the very small differences. And maybe you see like 1 3 pin from Toyman, and it's like, oh, this 1 pin is maybe a little bit harder to use because there's 1 less 3 pin, but also the 1 pin's a little bit safer. I think all those little things are worth thinking about. And so if your plan is to get the most out of the review, the best place to start is by paying attention in the game itself that you're planning to review. The next point I have here is don't ignore the decisions Naga agreed with. I was talking earlier about those white bars. There's a way to skip through the review that just only looks at the decisions that you differed from Naga, and I think you're missing a lot of the review if you're doing that. There could be a lot of decisions that maybe you forgot about, or maybe just like were a close decision that you made the same choice as Naga, but it's still worth reviewing those decisions as well, and consider like what like it's I don't think it's worth ignoring all those decisions. I like to just go through all the different choices. You can maybe go a little bit faster through the ones that are very easy, but I think it's worth scrolling through all the discards of the game. The next point I have here is use critical thinking. I don't think the way to use Naga is to just blindly follow whatever the snake says. It's fun to you sort of joke about like the snake god, but the way to use Naga is just a tool. It's just it really is just sort of like it has its weaknesses. You want to understand the points where maybe Naga's not the strongest, and just use Naga as like one sort of tool to figure out what the choice is. Maybe you can do your own thinking. You can use like books, you can use other people's opinions. You should use all that to figure out what the best choice is, not just blindly follow Naga. And sort of continuing that point, learn what Naga is good at and what Naga is weak at. That way you just sort of have an idea of how much should I be trusting Naga here. If it's, a very early game efficiency discard, I think you can pretty much just blindly trust Naga. There's a few times where, maybe there's some specific situations where Naga is undervaluing certain efficiency decisions, but these are like very small differences. And I think for the most part, if you're just like an efficiency discard, you can just trust Naga. But there are some situations, like especially we'll get into later, but like towards the end of a game, like South 4, maybe you don't just want to blindly trust Naga. So understand what Naga is good at and what it's weak at, so you know how much to trust Naga. And then the next point I have here is if you are looking through a review and you can't figure out why Naga is making a certain discard, don't just move on. This is like a great learning opportunity. If you don't understand what Naga is doing, try asking for advice. There's a lot of here in like the Riichi Nomi Discord is a great way to do it. I'm always happy to, if someone wants to try DMing me, I can always offer my own advice. But there's plenty of ways. But I don't just skip through the decisions you don't understand. That's the perfect way. Those are the perfect learning opportunities. It's like, why did Naga do this? And then you learn the answer, and now you've improved at Mahjong. So definitely don't skip through the decisions you don't understand. And then my next point here is sort of, again, going back to just how to improve. When you make a mistake, even after you figure out the right answer, like, oh, wow, I discarded this 9 pin, but clearly the 1 mon was better. That's only like the first step. Understand the correct discard. Then you want to spend the time to think about, well, why did I discard this in game? and figure out like, oh, it was because I didn't really understand the shape as well as I thought I did, and sort of go back through the thought process of why did I choose this, and then try to correct it. So it's like in the future, I'll try not to repeat this mistake. And then my final point here is at the end of each review, you'll get a Naga rating. And it can be fun to sort of track your Naga rating over time. And it is a fun number to look at, but please don't get too fixated on it. And it definitely should not be used as an indication of how good you are at Mahjong. That is absolutely not the way to use Naga rating. It's all it is just a number about how much your discards match Naga, and it has nothing to do with, you could, maybe you discarded a north instead of a south at one point, and both tiles are pretty much the same, and that'll like massively reduce your rating. It's just a fun number. It's not an indication of skill, and it'll vary wildly. So don't take the Naga rating number too seriously at all. I will stop real quick. We do have a question. What number should I use to validate my skill level? It's kind of hard to use. I think if you were going to choose one number, it would just be your like average rank. What your current if you're playing like Tenho, like your long-term like Dawn level, or like on Mahjong Soul, your rank. I think rank is really probably the best indication of your skill level if you're talking about online play. With a sufficiently like large sample size. You could, if you're gonna, you can go through and like, yeah, I did take the question seriously. Panda just had a great blog post about the sort of the variance in rank. So even rank has, it is tricky to have an exact number that you can just look to and just say, this is my skill level. But if you were going to choose a number, I don't think it's Naga rating. So yeah, it always bothers me a little bit when people will like, just take screenshots of the end of the screen and be like, oh wow, look at my Toyman had like scored like a 76. They must be so bad at Mahjong. And it's like, that's just not how the number should be used. Okay. So now let's go into actually sort of the thinking that Naga uses when choosing a discard. And this sort of applies to also just how humans will choose a discard as well. But I just sort of wanted to highlight what I think are sort of the four main sort of categories of the biggest sort of things you should be thinking about for each discard. And I sort of kind of have these ranked in a way so that like at the top here is efficiency. This should always be sort of like the first thing you think about when choosing a discard is, what is going to be the most efficient discard in the spot? What gives me the best chance to winning the hand? And that should be kind of like your default choice. And then, we can look at these other things and maybe that'll change your choice, but, especially early on in a round, you're going to just want to go make the most efficient discard. I think this one sort of point about this is like, even with a weak hand, you should, on the first few discards, just make the most efficient discard. We'll get into times when you don't want to do that, but, just I have a bad hand is not a good enough reason to not make an efficient discard. And one other point about efficiency is Naga, it is not purely looking at your own hand. Naga will also look at all the tiles that have been discarded when considering efficiency. So, if you, for example, like, if you have a penchant early, it's usually fine to keep. But if that penchant has already been like twice cut, then Naga's a lot more likely to discard it. And that's just kind of a basic example. But yeah, it combines, just the shapes in your hand as well as all the discards that have been made to figure out the most efficient discard. So what are some of the reasons you might not want to make the most efficient discard? Well, I think one of the common ones is if you're trying to incorporate a certain Yaku, which that tile wouldn't be compatible with, or the Dora. So, for Tanyao, Yakuhai, Honitsu, just all these Yaku, you'll change your play to increase your chances of these Yaku. So that sort of combines with efficiency and winning the hand. These last two are sort of defensive reasons why you wouldn't want to make an efficient discard. The first point I have here is Sakigiri. I think Naga and other AIs are very good at Sakigiri, in my opinion. Sakigiri just means sort of making an inefficient discard to hold a safer tile. So kind of the classic example is you have like a Ryamen pair, like 2, 3, 3-pin. And you're comparing the 3-pin in that shape to like a west tile. Well, holding the 3-pin is going to be more efficient because you have like the perfect Ishan 10 or perfect Tushan 10, whatever. But it's going to be more dangerous later, whereas the west will be safer to discard later. And so with every discard, Naga's going to be thinking about, should I go for the efficient discard or hold the safer tile? And then finally, just if Naga believes that there's a chance a tile might just already deal in, rather than go for Sakigiri, it's going to, at that point, start making defensive discards. And it'll do this against open hands that it believes will be Tempai, as well as it'll definitely respect Riichi quite a bit. And then one of the point I have here about defense is that Naga in particular really is reluctant to fully bet Ori if it can discard a tile it believes is safe enough, or like Mawashi. And particularly with Sotogawa or discarding tiles like outside of early discards, Naga really likes to try to Mawashi Sotogawa tiles. So that's just sort of a note there in defense. So now we have a couple examples of sort of all these decision making. Yeah, we have 7 different what would you discard problems. A note about the rules here, just so you understand what Naga is trained to play on, like Tenho 7-down rates, which those are just sort of your pretty basic online with like fourth avoidance rates. So here it's like plus 90, plus 45 for first and second, and then minus 135 for fourth, with third just getting 0. It's the typical ladder rates that I'm sure you are all used to. And then, with the way that Naga is trained, it is on players in the Ho-Oh room. So you can plug in different logs. Like if any of you are in ARML, you can put your log from ARML into Naga, but it's just worth noting Naga is going to play for fourth avoidance because that is how Naga is trained. So with that, let's go on to our first what would you discard here. So if you want to just type out your answers in the chat, it is currently South 1 in the north seat here. And what do you think we should discard from this position here? We have 2 open calls. Toyman's called the Haku here, and then Kamicha has called the Round Wind South. Okay, so I'm seeing quite a few answers here, and seems like the majority answers here are going with the 8 so. It's also some consideration for 5 mon. All right, we have quite a few what would you discards here to get through, so I think we'll show the answer here. So for this first one, this was just an efficiency discard. So that was definitely the primary concern here, and this is sort of what I was talking about. I think Naga is very good at these efficiency discards. So in this place, the sort of Naga was heavily considering the two discards that showed up in chat, which were the 5-mon and the 8-so. But we can see from the bars above the discards that the 8-so is the preferred discard. One of the note about these bars here, the earlier image just had a single bar. There's actually two different versions of Naga, which we'll get into later. The two main ones, which are the ones used in this screenshot here, are Nishiki and Kagashi. And those are just like two different variants models. And so above each tile, you can actually see what the different models think of the two different choices. And the way that all these screenshots are going to be set up, the bar on the left, which is colored in purple, is going to be Nishiki's thoughts. And then the sort of gray bar on the right is going to be Kagashi's thoughts. So you can see what the two different models think of the two different discards. So in this example, Nishiki thinks it's both models think it is solidly 8-so here, but you can see like the thoughts aren't exactly the same. The different models have slightly different thoughts. And this is just what Naga thinks is the best chance to win this hand here. And I think chat brought up some of the good points here, which is that the 7-so is once out. Holding onto the 5-mon gives you an Ipeiko chance in the Monzu, and we can also maybe read that Monzu's a bit easier to get because we can see quite a few Monzu tiles from Toyman and Kamicha, and even Shimocha's discarded some lower Monzu. But yeah, that was our first what would you discard here. We have some more here. So this is our second one. This time we are dealer in East 3. We have the 7-mon Dora, and we have this hand on turn 7.
We have a lot of what we do's, by the way, so I
think we should get
try to
things
move
moving.
quickly.
Yeah. So hopefully you've had your answer. So this is an example. I heard a lot of people saying 9-mon, or in this case, like the consideration would be 8-mon. And I believe that would be the choice here. Naga would go for that discard, except in this case, the 7-mon is the Dora. And so this sort of goes to that point about Naga trying to utilize Dora if it can. So here it's actually cutting away from the Sozu, which you can kind of think of as a Ryonkon 246, to try to keep the Penchon, which accepts the Dora. And so for our next, what would you discard here? Now we are dealer on turn 4. And what are we going to discard? Yeah, a note about the models for the last image. If you see 3 bars, typically the one on the far left is going to be Nishiki, and the one on the far right is going to be Kagashi. There's a third model which sometimes is run, at least Hibikari, which is a weaker model than Nishiki and Kagashi, which is why I think a lot of times they'll just be run with the two different models. But if you see three bars, pay attention to the ones on the left and the right, because those are the models we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so I hope you had enough time to think about this one. We're going to try to keep things moving here. So for this one, this is an example of holding on to the Yakuhai. So the most efficient discard here would be to discard away from the East Yakuhai and hold the Tumon. But you can see Naga is actually discarding away from the Tumon in favor of holding the Yakuhai. And this is to sort of show the point that, you know, sometimes we'll sacrifice some efficiency for the chance to go for a certain Yaku. In this case, it is the Yakuhai, and it's even double Yakuhai. So that is a very strong tile if we're able to pair up the East, which is why we're holding on to it, even though it sacrifices some efficiency. All right, here we have another first row discard. Turn 6, this time in North Seat. All right, I'm seeing some good answers here. Let's go see what Naga chooses. All right, and in this case, you can see that we are discarding away from Naga wants to go for the 8-mon. But if we look, there's also quite a big consideration to 9-so. And if you actually look at the bars here, remember the bar on the far right is Kagashi, which is one of the models. So Nishiki in favor here likes just going for the efficient discard of 8-mon. But we can see that Kagashi is less sure. Kagashi is almost 50-50 split on 8-mon and 9-so. We'll talk more about the differences between the models later, but this is sort of highlighting a point that the Kagashi model really values Yaku that give the hand a chance to open. So it just showing how the two different models are valuing the Tanyao Yaku here, with Nishiki going for the efficiency discard, Kagashi a little bit less sure. All right, this time we are West Seat with 5 Mondora. All right, let's take a look at the answer here. Quite a few different answers. The choice Naga goes with here is the 6-mon. Nishiki's a little unsure. Nishiki also considers 4-pin as an option, but Kagashi is very sure that we should go for the 6-mon. And this is just another sort of efficiency discard. This is a basically a 6-block versus 5-block choice. Should we hold the extra 6-mon pair, or should we drop the 6-mon and keep 6 blocks? And this is sort of labeled as an efficiency discard choice, but I think another consideration is also goes to the point of utilizing Dora. I think that Dora being the 5-mon is definitely a consideration and part of this choice here for Naga wanting to basically lock the Sanmenchan by discarding 6-mon, and the Sanmenchan accepting a second Dora as well. And also the Sanshoku chance as well is maybe something to think about, but just an efficiency discard choice here. All right, the next one here. This is a very early turn discard here, just turn 2. And what direction do you think we should go with? All right, let's take a look at what Naga wants to do with this hand here. And this is another example of Naga making a less efficient discard with the goal of trying to aim for a Yaku, in this case, a Honitsu in the Sozu. And this is something, if you're going to run your own logs through Naga, you'll notice that Naga and other AIs are sort of in agreement that Honitsu is an incredibly strong Yaku. And so you'll see with a lot of hands, they'll just sort of commit early, or at least keep the option to go Honitsu open here, holding all these honor tiles, the east and the south, and just dropping away from the middle Pinzu tiles, even though that sacrifices some efficiency. All right. Here we have another screenshot. We are turn 7 in the West Sea, and the Dora is the 7-mon. So what should we discard from this position? Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot of answers between 8-mon and 2-mon. You guys have correctly figured out that those are really the only two options here. But let's see what Naga does. And you can see that Naga is pretty confident that we should discard from the 8-mon. And this is a point of, what would you discard, illustrating the point that Naga is always thinking about Sakigiri. So this is a perfect Ishan 10. And so the 2-mon, keeping the 2-mon does not help the hand win at all, really. If you have this shape where you sort of have two like Ryamen pairs, the most efficient discard is always going to be to just lock one of the pairs. In this case, by discarding the 2-mon. Because if you think about it, if you discard the 8-mon and then draw 1 4-mon, you haven't actually progressed the hand at all. So from a pure efficiency standpoint, we should always discard the 2-mon here. And you can see Nishiki considers discarding 2-mon a little bit. Kagashi is having none of it. But both of the AIs are pretty solidly in favor of dropping the 8-mon. And this is a form of Sakigiri. So this is they're not discarding 8-mon for an efficiency reason. This is just pure Sakigiri. And a couple of reasons for that. It's a much more dangerous tile than 8-mon. This is sort of also going into the board reading. We can see like 2-mon is actually a pretty safe tile to hold, even though, if we look, it's like Genbutsu to Kamicha, Tsuji to Toyman, Sotogawa to Shimocha, whereas like 8-mon is just dangerous to everybody and sort of next to Dora. And then the other thing is that it's also a good Sakigiri candidate because it locks in a Ryamen, which contains the Dora and has like the Sanchoku chance, like confirms Pinfu. So yeah, this is an example of Sakigiri, and I think these are really important to sort of pick out while reviewing. Naga's great at spotting these opportunities to Sakigiri a dangerous tile. And here we can see Naga doing that with the 8-mon. All right, now moving on to a slightly different discard here. We can see that Kamicha on our left has declared Riichi. And how is Naga going to react to this? Another note about our hand is we do currently have 6 pairs, or we do currently have 5 pairs in the hand. So should be thinking about Chitoi while choosing your answer here. All right, you guys are some torn answers here between 1-so and 3-mon. Let's see what Naga thinks of the situation. And we can see that Naga does go for the 1-so. And so this is definitely, like, we are respecting Kamicha's Riichi. We're trying to cut a tile. We are using Mawashi here, which we sort of talked about earlier. And particularly Mawashi to Sotogawa, which just means the tile sort of outside the early 2-so discard that we can see Kamicha discarded on turn 4. 1-so is Sotogawa to that 2-so. And so Naga, rather than discarding just the safest tile, which would be the 3-mon, if we were purely trying to avoid dealing in, we would cut the 3-mon. This is sort of Naga taking the Mawashi path of trying to push the 1-so, which it doesn't think will deal in too often. It's an acceptable deal in risk to maintain the Ishanten. And a couple of points here. First of all, we ran this hand without the Chitoi Ishanten, and in that case, if we were just trying to defend, so if we weren't Ishanten, the discard would be the 3-mon. So this is a Mawashi. And then the other point is this sort of is another example of why we should just ignore the Dealin bars. If you look underneath the 7-pin and the 1-so, their Dealin bars are basically the same, but the Naga decision model itself thinks that 1-so is significantly safer than 7-pin. So just another further point that you should just ignore the Dealin bars. Okay, and so that wraps up our first set of the 7 discards, just illustrating sort of all the sort of thinking that goes into discards. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2 strongest Naga models. There's, I believe, 5 different models currently, but The only two that I really use and that are the two strongest models are Nishiki and Kagashi. And I think it is, if you run a log on Naga, if you go to their website, if you plug in a log, the default option is to run with only Nishiki and Kagashi. This is for the two default models, and you can run both models at no extra charge. So I think it is definitely worth running each log with the two different models, and then you get sort of two opinions for each choice. But it's useful to know what each model sort of model's preferences and how they sort of play a little bit differently. So first of all, Nishiki. I think Nishiki is a little bit more of like a balanced play style, and some of the notes about it is that it really values just taking tempai. So you'll see just a lot of times it just hits tempai, it declares Riichi. It's not going to try to wait around for trying to upgrade to a Tanya or like breaking tempai to look for Ramen weight. It finds tempai, it's just going to declare Riichi. Another point is it also, if you have a hand, say you have like a Dama, Pinfu Tanyao, or like a, some sort of like Tanyao Dora, like a 5200 point hand or something. It just a lot of times Nishiki likes a lot more Riichi decisions, even when like Dama could be considered. Nishiki really likes the value from Riichi a lot, more than the possible increased win rate from staying Dama. In terms of what calls Nishiki will make, Nishiki definitely does make calls. Both models, if it's an obvious like Tanya with a bunch of Dora, both models will call. But Nishiki's a little bit more picky. You'll see Nishiki pass a lot of closer calls. And then a point about defense is Nishiki is overall the more defensive player, particularly from tempai. Nishiki is quite willing to break tempai and just fully either Moashi or Beta Ori fold, even at the cost of breaking up a tempai. Kagashi, on the other hand, has a few differences from Nishiki. Kagashi's less attached to a tempai. It is willing to completely break a tempai if there's a chance to maybe either find an improved weight or add a Yaku like Tanyao. It also prefers Dama, whether that be Dama to try to look for a weight improvement or Dama to increase a win rate. It's just a lot more likely to Dama than Nishiki. So oftentimes when you see this sort of bar for a Riichi choice, 9 times out of 10, Nishiki will have a higher Riichi bar than Kagashi. Calling is sort of the opposite, where Nishiki really likes to Riichi, Kagashi really likes to call. And so if there's a chance to open, Kagashi will take it a lot of the time. And the difference is pretty stark, which you'll see if you get used to the two models. You'll see times where Nishiki will have almost a 0 bar and Kagashi's calling. Kagashi really likes to open and try to aggressively win hands. And then continuing sort of that aggressive playstyle, Kagashi, it'll fold. Both models will be pretty defensive if they're not tempai yet. But if Kagashi gets tempai, Kagashi gets very attached to that tempai. And it'll push some very aggressive tiles if it means it gets to maintain tempai. And in my opinion, maybe a little bit too much. So that could possibly be a weakness of the Kagashi model. It at least is worth noting that Kagashi is going to be very aggressive when it's tempai. And then finally here I have a point, just talking very briefly, when you have some early discards and you have like a bunch of like one of each of the dragons, and none of them been discarded, so it doesn't matter which one you cut. The order that Nishiki cuts them and Kagashi cuts them is different. It's not worth really thinking about. But just it's sort of worth noting that you'll sometimes see Nishiki cutting one dragon, Kagashi cutting a different one. All right, so we have a few examples of these differences. So this first one goes on to the sort of, taking tempai or breaking it for a different tempai. So here you can see that we have a Riichi, and it is in fact just Riichi Nomi on the 3-mon Penchon. And you can see Kagashi, or Nishiki, excuse me. Again, dealer, I'm Tenpai, I'm just going to take Tenpai. You can see discarding that 6-mon Dora, taking Riichi Nomi, and not looking back. Whereas Kagashi wants to try to connect to that Dora and is willing to break Tenpai by discarding the 2-mon here and looking for a Tenpai around that Dora. So here is an example of Riichi versus Dama. We have a Tanyao hand here. It's just a Tanyao Nomi. And you can see that it's for a lot of these choices, their differences are actually pretty large. You can see Nishiki thinks, and all the bar on the right there for Riichi is like essentially completely full. So Nishiki really wants the Riichi, but Kagashi maybe wants to wait around here. Not confident about, on the middle tile 4-pin weight, wants to try to stay Dama. So you can sort of see the difference here of how they evaluate Dama versus Riichi. And here is an example of the calling. So again, on the left, you can see Nishiki has a chance to chi this Ryanmin 8-pin to take Tenpai here. It would just be Tenpai for a Tanya only. But Nishiki, oftentimes you'll see this, like, denies the Tenpai chi. It's even getting pretty late here, towards the end of the second row. But Nishiki sees a chance for a very expensive Riichi and does not want to give that up with this chi. But Kagashi really likes the speed of an open hand here and is willing to chi away from this nice Ryanmin Ishan 10 to just take the Tanya Tenpai right now. Yeah, I have a question for Max here, talking about the Honba and the Riichi sticks in the middle. Yeah, that we actually not a point that we brought up in this lecture, but yeah, that is Naga probably undervalues the sticks in the middle. I think it is a consideration for Naga, but maybe it doesn't quite value it as much as it probably should. That is a good point that Max brings up. Okay, so now on to some of the defensive choices here. We can see that this is a Tenpai waiting on, well, you could take either the 2/5 Ryanmin or just the 5 Kanchan, but Toymin is declared Riichi, and it's a dealer Riichi, so pretty scary here. We just have our 2-Han hand, and this goes to the point of how the two models play differently at Tenpai. Nishiki doesn't want to fight the dealer, is just happy to, we have 3 green dragon, just cut away from the 3 green dragon and safely try to defend his hand. But Kagashi sees we're Tenpai, let's fight. Let's cut the 3-so. How bad can it be? Let's take our 5-so Tenpai and fight.
Yeah, I would like to add that 5-so is a Genbutsu weight, and Kagashi does really value those Genbutsu weights when fighting.
Yeah, that is another great point. Okay, so those are sort of the differences in the models. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the weaknesses of Naga. It's worth noting the weaknesses because, for decisions in these specific situations, these are sort of blind spots of the current version of Naga, where you kind of want to be aware that perhaps the best choice is not the recommendation of Naga. And so the first point here is late in the game decisions. So this is like, South 3, South 4, just sort of like later in the South round, or even like a West round game where specific winning, the value of a hand is less important than just winning the hand. Or there's like very specific values that you're trying to get. You need exactly 2,000 points to overtake your Shimocha, things like that. Naga does think about these. It's not that Naga completely ignores the situation, but it's a little bit weaker. It'll get attached to I can Riichi for like a Mongon, but it's like, well, maybe you don't quite need a Mongon. You can just Dama and take like a 3,900 point win. It's just, it's a not great at these all last decisions. Maybe it will like avoid making a call where like clearly calling is the fastest way to win a hand and get out of all last. It's not as strong as it is in the early East rounds. The next point I have here is defending against open hands. Naga does attempt to try to read open hands, and it is fairly effective, but it is not perfect. I think a lot of times a human can maybe read an open hand better than the current version of Naga, particularly with open hands where that you can sort of limit the source of like their Yaku. Like for example, Naga, you see someone make a terminal Dora pawn, and like all the Yaku high are dead except for the one Yaku high you're holding. Naga will sometimes just say, just push it, how bad could it be? But like as a human, you might read that hand and say, oh, this is like the only Yaku high that could deal in. So that's sort of an extreme example, but I think in general, not, it's passable at reading open hands, but maybe not perfect. Yakuman is definitely a complete blind spot. Naga does know that Yakuman exists. Like you'll see it try to sometimes go for Daisangen and things like that. But it's very weak when it comes to Yakuman, and it's even like weaker, especially like defending against Yakuman. And the biggest example is Naga, as far as I know, like basically just doesn't understand how to read and defend against Kokoshi. It does know how to play Kokoshi. It'll attempt to win Kokoshi, but it doesn't understand how to defend against Kokoshi. I have quite a few fun screenshots of Naga just like having a full discard bar on like the 4th West, because how can the 4th West ever deal in? Yeah, so it's not going to understand Yakuman. It doesn't understand a board of draws either. It's like not programmed to understand them at all. So it'll it'll like cut the 4th North for like a Sufurenda. It doesn't even understand how to tell you to declare a like Kyushu high abort. It doesn't understand a board of draws. 4th Riichi, none of them like that. The next point here is about games that go into West Round, and this also sort of applies to South 4, where you need 30,000 points. I don't know exactly how it is programmed. It kind of understands it a little bit, but it's very weak, I found, when it comes to decisions involving the 30,000 points. So it's take all the decisions with a grain of salt when it comes to playing around that 30,000 point requirement that is on ladder. And then there are some occasional bugs with calling. The most infamous one is if you have 3 of a tile in Onko in your hand, and the 4th tile is dropped, Naga will sometimes randomly decide to tell you to palm. This is not a good idea to make this palm. This is just a known bug that has not been fixed. So, for example, you're holding 3 green dragons, someone discards the 4th, it'll say, palm that green dragon, not con, palm. It's a strange known bug that hasn't been fixed yet. And there are some other bugs involving calls as well, but just a few bugs. And then the last thing I have on here is calls that shift the Haite. A lot of times it's a good idea if you have like a safe discard and it's free to do so to sort of shift the Haite away from the player who's in Riichi, but Naga doesn't quite understand that as much as it probably should. Okay, so that sort of concludes the talk about Naga. I'm going to sort of hand it over to Panda here to talk about some of the other AI tools that you can use to try to improve. But while we're here, if anyone has any questions about specifically Naga, we can maybe take some time to answer some more questions at the end. But if anyone had a question specifically about Naga, I think now is a good time to ask. All right, I think I'll hand it over. If you do think of any questions, I think we'll set some time at the end of the lecture to answer them. So there'll be plenty of time to ask any questions you might have. But for now, yeah, Panda, take it away.
Yeah, thanks Navitas for presenting about Naga. I just want to remind you guys again that Naga is free right now. If you just go to the website and log in on your Gmail, you can just use it for free. So yeah, I would highly recommend that you check it out. So for the second half of this talk, we're gonna be talking about different types of AI, so not just Naga, and what I like to think about as levels of evidence. So let's go back to, I guess, the basics. Like, why do we care about the choices that Naga makes? So Naga is trained to copy top players. It has an estimated stable rank of 9.4 Dan, which is very high. We know that Nishiki is trained on 1/3 of his logs are from Futoshi, who is a Tenui player and a professional. And we don't know who the other 66% of the logs are from. And we know that Kagashi is 100% a single player, and people think it is Aspen. I guess some things that Aspen and Naga share, or Kagashi share, is he does like his Dama and his Tenpai breaks, and he also likes calling and pushing, so I guess that's why people think that. But yeah, so Naga's overall gameplay is very strong, but Naga can't prove that any individual decision is correct. And for decisions where we might be a bit skeptical of what Naga's doing, we have a variety of AI tools and resources. And I want to talk about how we can use these to supplement our thinking about the game. So I want to bring up like a pretty famous quote. It's, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And Naga is a model, and sometimes it will be wrong, but that doesn't prevent it from being a very useful tool. And as we'll see, I think we will see that some AI tools that are much worse than Naga are sometimes useful, even though they can be really bad sometimes if we apply them in the right situations. So we should try to understand what assumptions and simplifications models make, and we want to use the best tools to analyze a given situation. And if assumptions are reasonable, then we want to value its conclusion more. So here's a, what would you do? Yeah, please answer in the chat. I'll address the comment in the chat. So there's a comment that said that in the suffix paper, the stable rank is different from what we showed in the slides. The answer to that is that during its 20,000 games on ladder, Naga went through multiple different model updates. The final version of Naga was, I think it's around like 8.2 or something. And then the new Naga, which was released after the ladder model, is estimated at 9.4 based on its results against the ladder model. So I hope that answers that question. Yeah, so this is what we do. It is dealer turn 1, south 3. We have a double Riichi choice, or a Dama choice into swap Tenpai. Looks like most people are choosing 2S Dama or 2S Riichi. Before I give you the answer to this, what you do, I want to talk about the Naga simulation. So the Naga simulation is a feature that you get when you pay for Naga. It's hard to use right now because you need to use a lot of points to run simulations. but it basically lets you simulate the outcomes of different discards as long as it's the dealer's first discard. So that would be the case here. So you set Naga's first discard, and then for the rest of the hand, Naga will play the hand according to a strategy. The other 3 players will be Naga, also with randomized hands, and they will play according to Naga. And the reason that we have this restriction that it only works for the dealer's first discard is because if you try to simulate a hand in the middle of the second row, for example, the discards from an opponent's player will kind of give you information about what their hand could be. So we can't randomize their hands and run the simulation. So that's why the restriction is there. So the pros, the Naga Sim gives statistics of what happens when Naga chooses different choices. Since Naga is not a reinforcement learning model, the simulation can correct regular Naga. So as a reminder, Naga copies people. It doesn't play against itself and learn, which is kind of what the simulation does. If we think Naga's choices after the first discard are reasonable, it can be a great estimate of EV. And it gives us confidence intervals, and we can measure the variance of the simulation. So the cons, it's very limited. You can only do it with the dealer's first discard. If we think Naga's choices might be suboptimal after a first discard, it might be an irrelevant simulation. And in extreme positions, we might not trust the Don point EV estimator. And we will talk about this later. But when the assumptions are reasonable, I consider Naga simulations the highest level of evidence for any individual Mahjong decision right now. And the reason I say that is because it's like an unbiased simulation of a game. There are 4 strong players making decisions, and if we think that our player is making reasonable decisions after a first discard, it'll be a great model of what cut will be best after many trials. So every time I see a turn 1 through 4 efficiency problem, especially 2 Shantan or lower with no threats, I will highly value what the Naga Sim does. So if that is the case in this position, it's a double Riichi decision. We can expect the other Nagas to defend or push wisely, and we have no decisions after double Riichi, unless we Dama. So let's look at the results. So regular Naga chooses 2S Riichi. In the simulation, 6S Riichi is better than 2S Dama, and 2S Dama is better than 2S Riichi. And regular Naga's choice actually loses 5 whole Dawn points of EV, which is a massive loss. In the simulation, 2S Riichi has a win rate of 40%. 6S Riichi has a win rate of 58.5, so there's an 18% win rate difference. And since we were in a big lead in South Bree, the simulation says we should take 6S Riichi by a lot. So basically, from what I said about Naga simulating being a very high level of evidence, I would say that the answer to this question is 6S Riichi. For the what would you do 2, which was what if it was East 1 with 25k points, we haven't run that simulation, but in this simulation, the expected value of 2S and 6S Riichi are actually almost the same. But 2S Riichi has 18% higher win rate. So it would imply that probably 6S Riichi is better than 2S Riichi, even in East 1, based on this simulation. Of course, we're trying to generalize these stats to East 1 stats, which might not be true. So if we wanted to be really certain, we would run the simulation for East 1. But my intuition from these stats is that the answer is still 6S Riichi in East 1 flat for ladder. Well, actually, since it's EV, I guess it would be in a lot of formats because BV is similar. So yeah, so I actually didn't talk about 2S Dama, which was another choice that we were talking about. And this slide is a bit technical, so I won't talk about all of it. We can just read the lines in yellow. So based on the confidence intervals of the simulation, we are 99+% sure that 6S Riichi is better than 2S Riichi. And we are greater than 68% sure that 6S Riichi is better than 2S Dama. And if you look at the logs, which you get all the logs of Naga playing against itself if you run a simulation, Naga will 2S Dama, and then it will switch to Riichi probably on like a 1 or a Suji weight. But we are pretty sure that 6S Riichi is better than 2S Dama, but we could run more trials to increase our confidence to maybe above 95% or something. So sim assumes that our opponents are Naga level. Yeah, the sim, yeah, that's basically what it's assuming. It's assuming that you're fighting free Naga. What is the best choice against those free Naga? Yeah, so that's our first Naga sim. I want to give an example of when the Naga sim is not good, even though it's an early discard. So in this discard, Suffix cuts west and Naga cuts 5p. So we might want to think, okay, what if we Naga sim this and we made Naga cut west versus 5p? And then maybe Naga could determine if Suffix's decision was better than its decision. But there's a problem. If we tried running a Naga sim, Naga is, even if we cut west, Naga will call 8s and then discard 5p into the simulation. But in this game, Suffix decided to cut west and then pass 8 so call. So that makes the simulation irrelevant because Naga will not cut west and pass 8 so it can't evaluate Suffix's choice of west cut and then pass 8 so because it will call 8 so later on in the simulation. So you can't run. So the simulation here would be probably irrelevant. Moving on to the next, what would you do? This is taken from a Yusei video. He's a strong Mahjong player. So East 1, West Wind, turn 6, and 8s is Fedora. And assume that all the uke are unseen. What would you do? So most people are saying 3M. Looks like you said 6p. Here's Naga's decision. Naga cuts Briam. And here is the Nisi decision. So Nisi is choosing 6p. And in this just generated output from the Nisi simulator, column 1 is the discard choice, column 2 is the round EV, win rate, column 3, deal rate, column 6, and dawn point EV, column 13. And Nisi thinks 6p is better than 2-3p, which is better than 3m, which is better than 7p. So what is Nisi? Nisi is a simulator developed by Nisi on Twitter. They're the source of Mahjong stats you see in Mahjong books, such as Statistical Mahjong Strategy, Shin Kagaku Suru Mahjong by Totsugeki, or Mahjong articles. And these stats or books have influenced the players that Naga has trained on, certainly. So you will see some Nisi influences decisions from Naga. We're on the second version of the simulator, and the details of how it works are paywalled behind $200 of articles. So I have not read these articles, so I can't tell you how exactly it works, but we can kind of guess based on how other simulators like Akujaan work. I believe a early version of Aquachan has a paper out that I have read. We also don't know how strong the simulator is. I would guess it's weaker than Naga if you had Nisi play against Naga, but we don't have that data. I think one flaw about Nisi is that I think each turn that is simulated by the simulator, there may be some small errors. Like they might underestimate how likely an opponent is to Riichi or win or deal into us. And the more turns go on, the more those errors can compound. So I think that Nisi is best applied when basically you don't let those errors compound. So in spots like K10, where you're pushing or folding the last tile, I think Nisi is great for that. In spots where we have a efficiency problem, I think Nisi is great for that because it's mostly about our own hand and how it develops. And I also think that Nisi is great for a baseline deal-in rate estimate. So going back to the original problem, Nisi chose 6p, Naga 3m. So this was a 1 Shan-10 hand where there was a possible 3-sided tenpai if we cut 6p. And this is a common source of disagreement between Nisi and Naga, is whenever there's the opportunity to take a 1 Shan-10 that is lower acceptance but higher chance of 3-sided weight, Naga will usually always take the higher acceptance, and Nisi will sometimes take the 3-sided weight option, which might be lower acceptance. I also ran a 5,000 trial Naga simulation on this hand for dealer turn 1, so not exactly the same position. And it did not provide a conclusive result for that simulation. So the simulation thinks all the choices are close. So based on the Naga simulation results from turn 1 and the Nisi results, I would claim that this is a Naga blind spot every time there is a 3-sided tenpai opportunity. And I think it is important to recognize these because it is kind of evidence that Naga is not always considering all the reasonable options. Sometimes it just misses them, like in this case. All right, moving on. Never what will you do. This time it is how to fold optimally. We have a big lead against dealer Riichi, and we want to fold. Seeing 9p, 8p, 8m. I think those are all reasonable candidates to consider. So one consideration for these folding problems is sometimes when you cut a pair or an onko or a triplet of a tile, it gives you more turns of safe tiles for the future. So sometimes you can cut a slightly more dangerous pair or triplet versus the safest single tile. So I would agree that those are the main 3 candidates. 9p is probably the safest single tile. It is 1 chance. 8m is probably the safest pair. Well, actually, it's our only pair. And then 8-pin is our only onko. So those are 3 reasonable candidates. All right. So yeah, so what I said about the pairs and onkos being consideration for folding, this is captured in a series of charts from Totsugeki. And I like to think about this as the 2%/3% rule. So in the chart you see on the right, it compares the round deal-in rate of cutting a single 7 through 9% tile And the 5% is the pair Dealin rate. So the 5% line is in red. Oh, actually, I think I showed wrong chart. I think this is the Onco chart. So in this chart, the 5% and 8% lines are overlapping. So it's basically saying that the triplet with 3% more Dealin rate has the same round Dealin as the single tile with 5% Dealin, because the ability to fold on future turns makes up for the immediate danger of cutting a triplet. And for a pair, but it is a 2% rule. So the rule of thumb, 2% for a pair, 3% for a triplet. And there is a counteracting effect called Onko Suji. And this is the bottom chart from Statistical Mahjong Strategy. And the Onko Suji effect is basically, if you have a triplet of a non-terminal tile, it will be larger Dealin than if you didn't have a triplet of that tile. And the reasoning is, if they're, for example, if they had a 6-7 pin weight, it's more likely that they would complete the other block of their one Shantan hand, ending up on a 5-8 pin weight if you're blocking a lot of the 8 pins. So this is like a counteracting effect to the 2% or 3% rule. So that's something important to keep in mind. So in the next slide, I went through all the stats and I calculated the numbers based on the 2% and 3% rules. So 8M versus 7M Riichi. 8M Dealin is 6.5% without the pair consideration, and we subtract 2 to get 4.5. The 8-pin Onko is 9.7, and then we subtract 3 to get 6.7. The 9-pin one chance by other, so one statistical fact is that on average, if your one chance is from other people cutting the 8s, it is more dangerous than if we held 3 of the 8s and had 9-pin in our hand. So one chance by other is 6.6, and 9p one chance by self, which is what we have because we have 3 8-pin, is 4.3. Hugh mentioned there was a typo in the last slide. I'll fix it after this, but 7% pair is 5% Dealin single tile, 8% triplet is 5% Dealin single tile. They have the same round Dealin. So for this problem, Naga chooses 8-mon, Lucky J chooses 8-mon. The stats say 8-mon and 9-pin are very close. And potentially, we could try to tiebreak 9-pin and 8-mon by making reads on Toyman, who cut a 9S pair. We could try maybe considering that 9-pin has lower average Dealin. So there are more considerations to maybe tiebreak the decision, but I think 9-pin and 8-mon are very close. And I guess, in my opinion, even though the AI are choosing 8-mon, I think 9-pin is a very reasonable decision. And I think that the Nisi Dealin rate stats are a great source of information. And in my opinion, I slightly value them higher than what the AI would do in a pure folding decision. All right. What would you do? I said assume red 5s because this was played without red 5s, but we're going to assume there are red 5s for this question. A lot of 4 pins, some success. Move on to a slide. So Nishiki chooses 4 pin, Kagashi chooses 6-0, and I also ran Pystyle. I like to think about Pystyle as like dollar store Nisi. I can't really think of a spot where I would trust Pystyle over Nisi for the same situation, but you can run Pystyle at any time, just online. It has a lot of limitations. It doesn't consider other players. It doesn't consider making calls. It doesn't consider weight quality. And assumes that if you discard into Tenpai, you will declare Riichi. So it can't Dama into change decision based on turn or upgrade. And also, it can't consider Chitoi, which is, I should have put this in this slide, but because it is relevant to what we do. It can't consider Chitoi and normal hand at the same time. But I think it can still be very useful for checking closed hand efficiency. And I think it's pretty good at closed hand 1 Shanten and 2 Shanten decisions. So let's look at what Pystyle does. So Nishiki cuts 4p, Kagashi 6-0, Pystyle 5 mon. And on the right is what happens if you go to the Pystyle website and you click Google Translate. That's what it'll say. So it gives you the expected value, it gives you the probability of winning, and the third column is the chance of hitting Tenpai at some point. So I wrote that this is a good hand to check a simulator like Pystyle because it's purely an efficiency puzzle. There are no threats. And also there are potential Yaku like Sanonko and SSK that Naga might find difficult to calculate. So the thing about Naga and Sanonko is sometimes Naga seems to not understand what Sanonko is. Like sometimes it'll pass a call into Tenpai because it doesn't recognize we have Sanonko as a Yaku. And it also makes some weird decisions from Sanonko versus Ramen Tenpai with Dora 0. So based on this information, I'm slightly devaluing the evidence of Naga's decisions, and I'm slightly increasing the value of Pystyle's decisions, despite the fact that Pystyle is not considering Chitoi at all. I think Pystyle also underestimates the value of 5 mon and 4p slightly, because it doesn't consider Sotogawa trap for the increased win rate at the end if we hit Tenpai on that weight. So this is just my opinion, and there are many arguments to why my opinion is wrong, such as Pystyle not considering Chitoi, but I personally trust Pystyle over Naga for a variety of reasons that I mentioned, and I think 5 mon looks the best based on Pystyle's decision and Naga's decisions, just thinking about what each of the models do. It's possible that I'm underestimating the value of keeping Chitoi as an option, and maybe Naga, or one of the Naga models is correct. But that's just my opinion. It might be right or wrong. And I would also add that I would accept the Naga simulator and Nisi simulator as higher levels of evidence for this problem. So we talked briefly about like levels of evidence, about how we want to match tools to spots where their assumptions work well. And Naga, I think Naga's assumptions are not, I think Naga's not very good at this decision because of Sanonko and maybe SSK. And I think Pystyle is missing the Chitoi, which I think is a lower priority, but also not great. So I think Naga Simulator and Nisi Simulator would do a great job at this position. And if I saw one of their results, I would probably say that's the correct answer most likely. All right. Moving on to this, what we do. We are in South 2 of a Hanchan. We have a slight lead over 4th and 3rd, and we're 11k behind 1st place. And we have the option of Riichi versus Dama. I see, looks like 3 Damas, 1 reject had 5 for SSK. So I think if this decision was in East 1, it would be an easy Riichi for going for Mongon. But South 2, maybe we can consider Dama. Okay, Riichi's. Looks pretty split between Riichi and Dama. So the AI tool that I'm going to use for this position is the placement estimator. So on the right, there's a picture of Naga, and this is what it shows after you win a hand or deal at the end of a round. So we see that after winning a Mongon, player D gained 44 points of point EV, player C lost 44 points of point EV. So the placement estimator, which I'll also call a utility function, basically converts an individual round's results into a Dawn point EV. And it can be useful for capturing the changing reward system closer to South 4. So it will capture that we might not care about pure EV as much if we're close to South 4 compared to if we were in East 1. And in the next slide, we're going to look at a simplified utility function to help inform our decision. Some flaws of a utility function. Some utility functions, such as Naga and Benawii, are inaccurate with specific point thresholds. So in South 4, if you have a 100-point lead over 4th versus if you had a 100-point deficit, it would be a really big benefit to have that 100-point lead, even though it's really small. And some placement estimators are actually not good at considering this, which I think is, I guess it's understandable because Naga doesn't actually use its placement estimator for making decisions. But I would hope that an AI like Mortal, which does use the placement estimator to make its decisions, would be able to deal with this better. Also, future dealer turns may not be considered highly in the Benawii utility function. So let's take a look at a simplified function, utility function that I plotted for a situation. So in this utility function, assume that we're ignoring first place. First place has 60,000 points. We're not catching them. And assume that our rewards are 2 for first, 1 for second, -3 for last, and 0 for third. And we assume that the other 2 players who aren't first place have the same amount of points. So on the x-axis, I plotted our lead over the 4th place. And if it's negative, it means that we're in 4th place. And on the y-axis, I plotted our scaled rewards. So it goes from -2 point something to close to 1, which makes sense because I set it up so that we can't get first place, basically. So we'll never get 2 points. We can get at most 1, at least -3. And for this position, we're going to look at the South 3 function. It's the green line. So going back to this problem, we have, on average, a 4,000 point lead over 4th place and 3rd place. So on the green line, we can look at 4,000. We go up. We see that the utility is around 0.2 or something. If we Dama and we win, we would gain 3,900 points or 5,200 points. So that would move us along. Okay, so I guess first to clarify, we're looking at the South 3 line because if we win, we're going to move the game to South 3. And this utility function is the value at the start of a round. So if we win 3,900 from a 4K lead, we would move up to around 8K on the green line, which looks like around 0.6. But if we reach it and we won Mongon, we would gain, let's say, 4,000 more, maybe to 12K, so maybe 0.6 to 0.7. So it basically shows us that the value of Riichi is not great if we ignore first place, because it gets us to a more shallow portion of the function. So that's basically how I like to think about this function. Obviously, it's not directly applicable because first place is there, and if we reach it and we win, we have a much higher chance of first place. So this is basically what I said in the last slide. We expect Dama to gain some win rate and maybe save us the Riichi stick, which does matter because the Riichi stick loss is in a steeper portion of the line. which is more important than winning 1,000 points on top of a Dama win, for example. And we see the green line start to taper off around the 7K lead, which encourages us to Dama if we ignore first place. However, we're balancing the value of Dama with the chance of getting first place. There is also uncertainty about the open players. So back to the screenshot. 2 open players, row 3. They might be Tenpai and push. So we don't actually know how much win rate we will gain from Dama versus Riichi. And I do think this is like a point of contention or debate. Like, how much win rate does Dama gain? And that is usually very situation dependent. So I would consider that an uncertain variable. So I think the answer to this question is quite difficult based on what we talked about. We're balancing the increased chance of avoiding third and fourth with the increased chance of getting first place. And I'll show some AI decisions for this question. So Mortal chooses Dama. Nishiki chooses Riichi, which we may have expected, and Kagashi chooses Dama, which we may also have expected from what we mentioned about Nishiki versus Kagashi. Yeah, so I can't really say for sure which decision is right. I just want to present all of the tools that I would use to analyze the situation, and I'll conclude that's up in the air. But I chose Dama, and if I had to play the situation again, I would lean towards Dama.
I'd just like to bring up, while you have this is also a good example of how the 2 different Mortal versus Naga like calculate their decisions. You can see that Mortal, I think, is probably heavily relying on that game EV chart to come up with a very high value of Dama, whereas like even Kagashi considers Riichi a little bit.
Yeah, that is true. And Mortal is trained by reinforcement learning, so it's playing against itself. It's using its utility function to estimate the end of game EV, whereas Naga is trained to copy players. So it's possible Mortal is better than Naga at these types of decisions. So that might make us want to lean towards Dama more, if we believe in Mortal's ability here.
This is definitely one of those like sort of weaknesses I was talking about earlier, where it's a sort of a late game decision where round EV is not the most important.
Yeah, so that's the last slide we had prepared. I guess we'll take any questions, and this slide was just going over everything we talked about.
Yeah, thanks for talking about all the different tools there. Definitely worth knowing about all the tools, just to sort of especially to cover the situations where Naga is maybe not the strongest at, like that last example where it's, unclear how much Naga is valuing the game EV, the Dawn Point EV. So it's useful to look at other options like Mortal and then the simulators like you were talking about. So it's just good to know about all the different tools. I'll take Claire's a question here. Do you think that AI has improved your games personally? How much? For me, it is been the single most impactful way to how I play. I've definitely read some books as well, but I think that for me, doing log reviews of of my games, it just learning to try to copy Naga, I think, is a very useful way I found to learn to get better. And it, you can, I think, just trying to copy Naga as closely. My strategy has been try to copy Naga as like closely as possible, except for maybe the few weak spots which I was talking about. And then, I'm still working to try to get to that point, but once you get to the point where you can reliably copy Naga, that's a great baseline to maybe try to explore some other strategies. But yeah, it's been definitely very important for how I've learned Mahjong.
Yeah, I guess I'll also answer your question. Yeah, basically my whole time playing Mahjong, I have used some AI. I started with Akra-chan for like a year, and then I swapped over to Naga at some point, and I think it's been very influential. And during the time that I was playing with Naga, I also dabbled into studying some suffix VODs. I also watched some Lucky J, so I think I've definitely gained a lot of inspiration from the AI.
Yeah, the follow-up question of how long did it take me studying Naga to see improvements? It's for me, it's a difficult question because similar to Red Panda, I've pretty much been. It's hard for me to even remember when I haven't been using AI to study. So, just playing, I would have. It's hard to know how much I would have improved without using AI, since I've pretty much been using it for as long as I can remember. So it's a tricky question to answer. It's been an incredibly useful tool for me.
Yeah, so I actually, I guess kind of a plug, but in my last blog post, I share a notebook that lets you plot your stable rank over time. So it basically measures like how well you're doing over time on ladder. And I think like for me, like if I look at my like Tokujo stats, it's just like consistently moving up until I reached O. So I think it was a very influential and important part of my improvement for sure. If you want to check out that post and maybe run your own stats, you can look at your graphs.
And then to answer the other question of Red Zone asked, how do you decide which games to review with AI? For me, I have sort of two mindsets. Well, almost like three different sort of mindsets, I guess. The first mindset would just be I just want to play a game casually, just have fun. A lot of times when my games on stream are kind of like this, or if I just want to have a sort of relaxed game, just enjoy Mahjong. I usually don't run those through Naga. I'm sort of not stressed about every small little decision. I'm just sort of having fun playing Mahjong. But I'd say the majority of my games, especially the ones I play off stream, I'm playing with the goal of trying to improve my Mahjong. So that sort of starts with me like playing the game very seriously, like very locked in. I'm like focused on the game. I'm not doing anything on the side. And then I'll usually run all those games through Naga and at least just skim through the discards, if not study them in depth. So I'd say I've run the majority of my games through Naga. But sometimes I will still play some casually. And then I guess the third category is any sort of tournament game or ARML game. I don't run any sort of those games through Naga. I just want to sort of, I find it like a little distracting if I know I'm going to run the game through Naga. So for games I really care about, I don't want to think about like, oh, this discard's going to hurt. That one's going to show up in the review. I don't want to have any of that sort of mindset. So I don't run any of my sort of tournament or ARML games.
Yeah, for me, I think Navitas also does this a bit, but I have a spreadsheet. So every game in Ho I play, I will plug it into Naga, put it into a spreadsheet, track all my scores, and I will at least skim the logs. And I like to, like during the game, I will make note of what I think the importance of every decision. So I think a lot of Mahjong is coming down to like key moments that are really important. So that's stuff like I have a lot of door in this hand. I need to play it very efficient and well to maximize my winning chances. Or I'm one Shanten. I need to play this one Shanten very well. Or I need to find optimal fold against this Riichi, which is really important. So in all the important situations, I will kind of mentally keep track of which ones I'm unsure about, and those are the ones I'm going to use when I skim the Naga log.
The interesting question from Ryan, out of curiosity, what kind of improvement do you want most from the current AI? I'm going to sort of interpret that to mean like, what do you want the next version of Naga or Mortal to sort of improve at? For me, I think it's definitely hand reading. I think that's one of the things that I find most interesting about Mahjong is trying to figure out what you can deduce about another player's hands just from the limited information of their discards. And I think it's something that it's one of the weaknesses I was sort of talking about earlier, where Naga I think is passable at it. It'll recognize if someone's going Honi 2, or it'll like recognize like maybe there's like a Chanta threat. It does it to a limited extent, but I think there's a lot of potential there for the future AIs where they can like make sick reads where it's like I think there's a lot of potential there to improve at sort of reading hands, which is that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, I really like this question. So I'm an ML engineer, so I have my own biased opinions about what Naga's doing poorly. I completely agree with Navitas. I think the hand reading's weak. I think that hand reading is not it doesn't necessarily have to be that hard. I think that books like Riichi Mahjong Strategy by Namada have really good pieces of advice on hand reading and on concepts like irame, which is how it's translated in what I read. So I honestly don't think it should be that hard for AI to be able to do it. But so yeah, I would like to see Naga improve on that. I would also like to see Naga maybe match its simulation more. So I mentioned how Naga simulations are higher evidence than Naga's decisions for relevant positions. And I think that some form of reinforcement learning, like with suffix or mortal, on top of the original Naga, I feel like that should be able to improve its performance. And I guess maybe one final point is I would like to see the perfect Mahjong AI figure out what Lucky J is doing well, and like when to apply it.
Yeah, I think we're still kind of in the infancy of Mahjong AI. I think there's definitely a large room for improvement. It's kind of excited to see what we have in like 10 years.
Oh, I will add that it doesn't seem. I'm not sure that the Naga team is trying to make the strongest AI. Like they've made more models, so I think they're trying to like maybe show you how you play different play styles, and allegedly they're working on a Sanma model. So maybe it's not their priority, and some other team will have to pick out the goal of being the strongest Mahjong AI.
To answer Claire's question just real quickly about why Naga went down, it was the host website had some issues, so it was a sort of bigger issue with Nico Nico. You can there's plenty of news articles if you're interested, but it didn't have anything particular with the Naga team in specific. It was just their host website.
If nobody has any further questions right now, my final question is if people want to get in touch with you with other questions that come up as they think of them, as they start attempting to use these strategies or continue attempting to use these strategies to improve their Mahjong, what is the best way? Is it a cold DM, or what's the best way for them to get in touch with you with their questions?
For me, I would definitely just say direct DM on Discord. Don't be afraid to DM me. I've had some people try to DM me on Twitch. Don't do that. I won't notice it for like a month. It's definitely not the way to contact me. Just directly DM me on Discord. That I'll see your message. And yeah, please do if you have any interest in AI. Maybe you're just looking to get into it. I can definitely share some resources and yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm not that scary to talk to.
Yeah, same for me. Just DM me on Discord or add me in a channel, and I'll probably see it.